My husband sold my deceased grandmother's jewelry while I was on vacation to fund his business, but he didn't know I had GPS on every piece. And when police tracked the locations, they discovered he was defrauding investors for hundreds of thousands and now faces prison. I'm 29 years old. I work as a freelance graphic designer, and what happened 6 months ago literally changed my life completely. When I say my husband sold all my jewelry without telling me anything, and when I say all, I mean all, including the pieces I inherited from my grandmother. People think I'm exaggerating, but no, that's exactly what happened. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand how I got to this point, because now that I think about it, the signs were there all along. I was just too blind or too trusting to see them. I met Nicholas like 5 years ago. I think it was at a party thrown by a mutual friend. And honestly, at first I thought he was charming. You know, one of those guys who knows exactly what to say and when to say it. He worked in finance, or so he said, something related to investments and startups. I never really understood what exactly he did, but it sounded important, and he was always wearing a suit and talking about meetings with investors. We got married after 2 years of dating. It was a small wedding because I didn't have much family, just my dad and a couple of uncles. My mom had passed away when I was 15, and my grandmother, who practically raised me after that, died right before Nicholas and I got engaged. From my grandmother, I inherited her jewelry collection. They weren't super expensive pieces like million-dollar diamonds, but they had a lot of sentimental value and some were antique. There was a pearl necklace she wore at her wedding, some gold earrings with emeralds that my grandfather gave her on their 25th anniversary, things like that. To that, I added my own jewelry that I had been collecting over the years. Some Nicholas gave me for birthdays and anniversaries, others I bought myself when I closed good design projects. The first 2 years of marriage were pretty normal. We lived in an apartment downtown, nothing luxurious but comfortable. I worked from home, and Nicholas left early, and came back late, always with that energy of closing the next big deal. I started to notice something was off like 6 or 8 months before everything exploded. Nicholas started talking a lot about a new project, a tech startup or something like that. He said he needed initial investment and that he was gathering capital. I asked him several times what it was specifically about, but he always gave me vague answers like, "It's complicated to explain," or "When everything is ready, I'll show you." And since I don't understand much about business, I just let the topic go. What I did notice is that he started getting more anxious, more irritable. Sometimes I'd find him awake at 3 in the morning looking at his laptop with a worried face, and when I'd ask him what was wrong, he'd tell me nothing, that it was just work stress. In March of this year, so like 7 months ago approximately, my best friend Abigail invited me on a girls' trip to Cancun, just a week to disconnect a bit. Nicholas encouraged me to go. In fact, he was the one who insisted that I take that break, because according to him, I had been working a lot and needed to relax. I should have seen it coming. Seriously. Looking back, it's so obvious that he wanted me to leave so he could have the house to himself, but at that moment, I just thought he was being considerate. I left Friday morning. Nicholas took me to the airport, gave me a goodbye kiss and told me to have fun, not to worry about anything, that he would take care of everything at the house. During the week in Cancun, we talked on the phone a couple of times, normal text messages, everything seemed fine. I came back the following Friday night, like 9 or 10 at night, and Nicholas wasn't home, which didn't seem that strange either because sometimes he had business dinners or meetings that ran late. I left my suitcase in the bedroom and went to change. I opened my jewelry box to take out a necklace I wanted to wear the next day, and that's when my heart literally stopped. The jewelry box was empty. Completely empty. There wasn't a single piece. I thought maybe Nicholas had moved things for some reason. I don't know, maybe cleaning or reorganizing. So I started searching all over the bedroom like crazy. I checked drawers, closets, under the bed, in the bathroom, everywhere. Nothing. I started to panic. You know what I mean? That feeling that something is terribly wrong, but your brain still can't process exactly what it is. I called Nicholas like 10 times, but he didn't answer. I sent him messages like, "Where is my jewelry? And I need you to call me now." But nothing. He wasn't even reading them. I stayed up all night waiting for him, sitting on the living room couch, unable to even think straight. Just going over in my head all the possibilities. Maybe we had been robbed. Maybe he had stored them somewhere else for security. Maybe I was going crazy and the jewelry was in some obvious place I wasn't thinking of. Nicholas arrived like at 2 in the morning, and when I saw him come in, I immediately knew He knew something. He had that face, you know, that expression of guilt mixed with nervousness. Before he could say anything, I was already yelling at him. "Where is my jewelry, Nicholas? What did you do with my things?" And he just stood there for like 5 seconds without saying anything until he finally let out, "I sold them." Just like that. I sold them. As if he was saying he had sold an old pair of shoes or something. I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't process what I had just heard. And I said to him, "What do you mean you sold them? You sold what exactly?" And he said, "All of them. I needed the capital for the business. It was the only way to get the money fast." I don't know how to explain what I felt in that moment. It was like my whole body was shaking, but at the same time I was completely frozen. I wanted to vomit and scream and cry all at the same time, but I couldn't do anything. Just stand there, staring at him while he tried to explain to me that it was an investment, that when the business took off he was going to buy me new jewelry, better than what I had, that this was temporary. To understand him, I yelled at him that those jewels couldn't be replaced, that they were my grandmother's, that they were the only thing I had left of her, and he had the nerve to tell me I was being too sentimental, that they were just material things, that the business was more important. In that moment, something broke inside me. You know, like when you realize the person you married isn't who you thought they were, it's like someone ripped a blindfold off your eyes suddenly. That same night, I grabbed my laptop and started researching what I could do legally. Turns out I had been cautious enough to ensure all the important jewelry, and I had photographs of each piece, receipts for the ones I had bought, inheritance documents for my grandmothers. Everything was well documented. I also remembered that like a year ago, when Nicholas gave me a gold bracelet for our anniversary, he had told me about a tracking app for valuable jewelry, something with GPS integrated in small tags that you could put on pieces. And me being the paranoid person I am, had bought those tags and put them on almost all my important jewelry. I opened the app on my phone and I almost had a heart attack when I saw the locations were active. The jewelry was literally scattered all over the city. There were like 10 different locations, some in consignment stores, others in pawn shops. One even appeared at an auction house on the north side of the city. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed up taking screenshots of all the locations, organizing my documents, preparing everything. At 8 in the morning on Saturday, I called Abigail, told her everything, and she came to my house immediately. Nicholas had locked himself in his office and wasn't coming out. I think he knew he had screwed up, but didn't realize how much. Abigail accompanied me to the police station. There we talked to a detective named Brooks, a guy like in his 40s who at first seemed somewhat skeptical. But when I showed him all the evidence, the photos, the documents, the GPS tracking, his attitude changed completely. He told me this was a clear case of unauthorized sale of property and that also, with all the evidence I had, they were going to be able to trace the pieces and possibly recover them. Detective Brooks asked me a ton of questions about Nicholas, his work, his finances, if I knew what exactly his business consisted of. And honestly, when I started answering, I realized that I knew practically nothing concrete about what my husband did. The detective asked me for access to our joint bank accounts and any information I had about Nicholas's business accounts. Turns out we had a joint account where we deposited for household expenses, but he had his separate accounts that I didn't know much about. I gave the detective all the information I had, and he told me they were going to investigate, that it could take a few days, but that he would keep me informed. I went back home and Nicholas was still there, acting like nothing had happened, trying to talk to me normally like, "Do you want me to order Chinese food for lunch?" And I just completely ignored him. I told him I had gone to the police, that I had filed a formal complaint, and his face turned white, literally white as paper. He started telling me I was exaggerating, that this was a matter between us, that there was no need to involve the police, and I told him that the moment he decided to sell my things without my permission, this stopped being a private matter. He got furious, started yelling that I was betraying him, that how could I do this to him when he was just trying to grow our future, and I don't know how I didn't hit him in that moment. Seriously. The rage I felt was indescribable. Like 3 days later, Detective Brooks called me and told me he needed to see me at the station, that they had found interesting things. When I arrived, I sat in his office and he basically dropped a bomb on me. Nicholas's business accounts were full of irregularities. There were suspicious movements, transfers that didn't add up. There were indications he was using money from supposed investors for personal expenses and to cover debts from previous projects that had failed. So basically, Nicholas hadn't just stolen from me. He was involved in much bigger financial fraud. The detective explained to me that now this had become a more serious criminal investigation, and that Nicholas was probably going to face charges not only for the sale of my jewelry but also for fraud. My head was spinning. I couldn't believe that my husband, the person I had shared my life with for 3 years of marriage, was basically a scammer. Detective Brooks told me that in the meantime, they were going to work on recovering my jewelry, that, with the GPS locations I had given them, they could track the pieces and legally demand that they be returned, since they had been sold without the legitimate owner's authorization. Over the next 2 weeks, the police went to each of the locations where my jewelry appeared. Some stores cooperated immediately. Others put up more problems, but in the end they had to hand over the pieces because the evidence was clear. While all this was happening, I had already decided I wasn't going to stay in this marriage. There was no way to come back from something like this. Trust was completely destroyed. And besides now, I knew Nicholas was a liar and a criminal. I contacted a lawyer specializing in family law named Spencer, a woman like 50 years old, super professional who I really liked from the first moment. I told her the whole situation, and she told me I had a very strong case for divorce and to protect my assets. That also, with the criminal charges Nicholas was facing, I was going to be able to come out of this without losing anything financially speaking. The final confrontation with Nicholas was like 2 weeks after this whole nightmare started. By that time, I had already temporarily moved in with Abigail because I couldn't stand being in the same house as him. I went one day when I knew he was there to pick up more of my things and to give him the divorce papers. When I walked in, he was sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. He looked terrible, honestly, like he hadn't slept in days. But in that moment, I didn't feel even an ounce of pity for him. I gave him the papers and told him, "This is the divorce, sign it." And he tried to talk, tried to tell me we could work things out, that he was going to recover the money, that he was going to buy me new jewelry. All the same speech as always. I told him I didn't want to hear it, to sign the papers and to get a lawyer, because things were going to get ugly. Nicholas was formally charged with fraud and unauthorized sale of property. Like a month later, Detective Brooks's investigation had discovered he had defrauded several investors for significant amounts of money. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some of those investors also filed civil lawsuits against him. It was a total disaster. I kept in contact with the detective and my lawyer, monitoring the whole process, making sure my interests were protected. During all this time, Abigail was my rock. Literally, I don't know what I would have done without her. She let me stay at her apartment as long as I needed. She listened to me cry. She accompanied me to appointments with the lawyer and to the police station. She reminded me that I hadn't done anything wrong and that I was going to get through this. There were moments when I doubted myself. You know, that little voice that tells you maybe you're exaggerating or maybe you were too harsh. But Abigail always reminded me that Nicholas had made a conscious decision to steal from me, to sell, things he knew had immense sentimental value to me, and that besides he had been committing fraud probably throughout our entire marriage. The recovery of the jewelry was a long and complicated process. Some pieces they recovered quickly, others took longer because they had gone through several buyers. But the police and my lawyer were incredible in that process. To my surprise, I managed to recover almost everything, like 95% of my jewelry, including all of my grandmother's pieces, which were the ones that mattered most to me. When I finally had everything back, it was a very strange feeling. On one hand, I was relieved and grateful, but on the other hand, each piece reminded me of what Nicholas had done. It was like having them back, but stained by the betrayal. The divorce was finalized like 2 months ago. Nicholas didn't put up much resistance in the end because he was too busy dealing with the criminal charges and civil lawsuits. I came out of the marriage with my jewelry, my personal savings that were in a separate account, and basically without losing anything financially. Nicholas, on the other hand, is facing the possibility of going to prison, depending on how the criminal trial turns out. He lost his license to work in finance, and he's completely financially ruined with all the lawsuits he has on him. Now I live in a new apartment, smaller than the one Nicholas and I had, but it's completely mine, and that feels good. I resumed my design work with more energy than before. Honestly, the divorce was liberating in many ways. I don't have to worry anymore about a husband who's out there doing who knows what with money that isn't his. I have the jewelry stored in a safety deposit box at the bank, not in my house, because after everything that happened, I don't trust having them nearby, even though rationally I know there's no danger anymore. Sometimes I go see them, especially my grandmother's pieces, and it's like a way of connecting with her, of reminding myself that I survived this, Last week, I went for coffee with Abigail, and she asked me if I would ever forgive Nicholas. I told her the truth, that I don't know. That part of me understands he was desperate and made stupid decisions. But another part of me, the bigger part if I'm being honest, just can't overlook what he did. It wasn't just the theft of the jewelry. It was the lying, the manipulation, the fraud, everything. She asked me if I regretted reporting him to the police, and I told her no, not for a second. Because if I hadn't done it, I probably never would have recovered anything. And he would have kept defrauding people and ruining lives. Abigail told me she was proud of me, that not everyone has the courage to do what I did, and that made me feel good, like maybe I did do the right thing after all. I guess what I learned from all this, if there's any lesson, is that you really never fully know people, not even the ones who sleep next to you every night, and that trusting is fine, but it's also fine to protect your things and have documentation of what's yours, because you never know when you're going to need it. My grandmother always said that a woman should have her own resources, her own money, her own things, and I always thought it was a bit old-fashioned to think that way. But now I understand perfectly what she meant.